Hello everyone, welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are here tonight with episode 7 of the Sunderhearth project, which is kind of an exciting, improvised, live world-building exercise that was the brain baby of my creative partner Steve on the other side of the screen there. And I'm really excited to get to this episode. It's been a really fun project so far. I've been trying very, very hard to not let any ideas germinate for running games in this setting, and it has been very difficult. But I'm excited to talk about monsters this evening and to welcome our guest on. But before we welcome our guest, Steve, is there anything that you want to say up front here?
No. No. I mean, I'm
as always, sir.
Right. I'm really glad to be here. This has been a blast so far. It's weird, right? Because I just echo your same sentiments. Like, it's hard not to try and start thinking about the setting, and wanting to run games in it. We've had some amazing, collaborators so far. It's been interesting to see something take a direction you wouldn't necessarily have thought of yourself when you sat down pen and paper to try and dream up something. So that's pretty cool. And I guess now we'll see even further where it goes tonight when we talk about some monsters. So we'll see.
Yeah, excellent. I imagine we'll probably talk about magic as well, par for the course. But before we talk about any of that, I'd like to welcome our guest this evening, Rachel. Why don't you say hi to everybody and do any kind of plug or introduction that you would like to?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Rachel. I don't really have anything to plug. I don't have a channel or anything. I am by education a biologist. I've worked as a zookeeper. Right now I'm working in an emergency vet hospital. So I'm very much around and know a lot about basic ecology and biology. And I've been playing on and off D&D for, I think, maybe like 7-8 years now. Very sporadic, but still hanging on there. But yeah, I've been watching this kind of series since the beginning, and I love it so much. I'm so excited. But yeah, that's about it.
Fantastic. We're very happy to have you on. It's awesome. I don't know that we've actually had a guest other than maybe your dad, Steve, who said up front and meant it that they had been watching the series as it came out. So that's nice.
Everybody else has had to do homework.
Yeah, everybody else is like, okay, wait, where are the episodes? How do I find them all? I gotta watch them all back to back to back, which is also fine.
That's fine. Yeah, not to discredit anybody who's been on.
If you've made it through any of this series, thank you.
Right.
I don't know how. God bless you.
I haven't watched any of them.
Me either. What would I? Those guys.
That's weird.
So, do we have a plan of like where we want to start? I mean, I know the whole plan is to not have a plan. So.
Yeah. So I did a really good job on not having a plan this time.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think we have an interesting caveat with tonight, right? Everything else we've touched on has been sort of, hey, what's inside of the zone of Sunderhearth, and then what's outside, right? So what's magic like inside? What's it like outside? Well, it's not outside, but what's technology like inside? So on and so forth. with Monster Ecology, I guess let's start off with a really broad question. Using monster loosely, are there monsters in the world outside of this pocket? Like, we know that outside, because of some of the stuff that happened, that goblins and I got this wrong last time too. Goblins and kobolds and dragonborn, something else, orcs. Maybe I don't remember. Watch another episode. Happened when the magic kind of went kablooey. But are there monsters on the outside, or are they just on the inside?
I don't know. I think I like having a pretty distinct difference between what's inside and what's outside. So I think if we do end up having monsters that are outside Sunderhearth, they need to be drastically different from the ones that are found inside.
Yeah. I think, well, considering that there's no magic outside, there are a lot of, typical D&D monsters, like not your squirrels and rabbits and stuff, that would probably just have like died off, either slowly or immediately. And then inside, I imagine they would kind of mutate like everything else is. I'm not quite sure how, but
I mean, that sort of fits the format we had talked about, because we had talked about the god of magic having actually been the second god in the history of the world. Or no, the first one, now there's been a second one, because the god of dragons had come to the prime material plane and had been destroyed or killed or something, and that killed the dragons on the outside of the world, right? Like their creator was no longer around, therefore they couldn't be. So I mean, we've already sort of set a precedent for that type of thing. And I do think that brings a very, forgive me for the term, beautiful sterility to the outside world, because it's gone. I know, right? You never hear those two words together, but the outside has gone to science, right? They've gone to politics, and that's how they run the world. So if there's not beholders and, gibbering maws and so on and so forth out there, and the worst maybe you run into is the quote unquote dire version of a normal animal, dire bears, whatever, those things, the big bad, so that the farmer on the outside really is worried about this dire bear, this hulking 12-foot bear, this behemoth of a bear that in normal D&D you kind of go, that's first level stuff, right? That's second level stuff. But on the outside, when you don't have magic, and this bear can, rend you for X number, it becomes a lot scarier. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy, that the outside people are scared of that, and the inside people are like, yeah, but what about the plants that actually eat you? Like, plants eat you, or whatever.
Yeah, I think even like on the outside, you might run into maybe the occasional like hill giant or things of that nature, things that could still exist without the presence of magic. Unlike, like a cloud giant, which obviously they can't be in a castle in the clouds if there's no magic. That's, not feasibly possible. Or, things. So probably not, aberrations and things from, different planes of existence, and the kinds of things like that wouldn't exist. But I think a lot of the other more terrestrial material plane type stuff, while it might be rare to find, especially kind of closer to the civilized portion just outside of Sunderhearth, I think if you got into the wilds of the outside world, that you could find that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the first thing I thought of was like something like an owl bear. Like, are they magical? Technically, I don't know. I think maybe like this is not something for the scope of this session, but like something for like general world building maybe later on, or for different DMs who are running in this campaign setting. They might want to like take a few moments in the monster manual and be like, okay, well, this thing would still be there, this thing would still be there, this thing definitely wouldn't, and kind of just piecemeal what they think is important for their own campaign and adventures.
Yeah, I think that's important advice. I've run into a few DMs before who seem to feel like the entirety of the monster manual needs to exist in their setting. And that's just not the case. Like, if you want to make an argument for everything being available, then that's fine. But really, that's just an encyclopedia. That's just a thing for you to go to and pull things out of in order to use in your setting. And I think the same thing applies to this, absolutely. Go through the monster manual, find the things that make sense for how you want to run Sunderhearth, and disregard the rest. It's easy.
I think an interesting, and you guys kind of both touched on it, is if you're looking at, okay, you know, hill giants make sense, storm giants and their flying castles, not so much. The dire bears make sense, hydras maybe not so much. So that makes the out, and this is me a sort of weird dichotomy to the inside. The outside is much more brutal. The inside is much more fantastic, right? It's the outside. You know, you do have your hill giants and your. I mean, I think owlbears, sure, why not, right? They could just be a very weird natural animal, and it does give you a lot more pizzazz to your punch when you're running that sort of outside game, and you go, but here is a beholder that managed to get itself out, and now the beholder is not just a monster that you try and kill, but it's a, why is this here, right? It has a lot more meaning. It's the idea that there's a Medusa, not Medusas, right? It's the Minotaur, not Minotaurs. And I think you can craft your story, if you choose to go that direction, around those ideas on the outside, and it makes things have a lot more impact. You get more bang for your buck using things you're used to using.
Yeah, I think another thing that is fun with the whole ecology theme is that in terms of the history of Sunderhearth, I think that when the barrier went up, depending on, I guess, what the DM chooses for the timeline for how long it takes for the outside to lose their magic, or magical things outside to kind of lose their magic, you can kind of have this period of time where there are still magical creatures, but people are getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So like things like hydras and like big scary monsters are suddenly, for a period of time, like they need to be exterminated quickly because people are like, we're losing our magic, this is a problem.
Yeah. That's cool. I like that idea. There again of being a buffer period, and it being up to the DM who's running the game. Right.
I mean that dovetails so nicely into the talk. You hit it nail on the head there. Like with stuff losing its magical potency over time. Well, if people lose their magic because they tap it and they lose it rapidly, but a Hydra doesn't lose it very rapidly because it is innately a magical creature. Maybe there are still a few of those things in your world that are still out there, and they are cranky and upset because they're withering away. But instead of the gallivanting heroes going in and killing the Hydra to go sell its parts, for spells, no one needs that anymore, right? Like, though that's such a done thing. Now you have to go kill this Hydra because it's literally losing its mind. It's gone feral because it doesn't have everything it needs anymore. And so when it used to be happy defending its lair, now it really is out there rampaging a countryside because it doesn't, it needs to. There's that sort of animalistic drive, that predatorial drive, that it's not being contained with its normal in touchness with magic. Trademark.
Yeah, I love that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I love the idea of like a Hydra with rabies. That's terrifying. So yeah, I like that a lot. So adversely then, looking inside Sunderhearth. I know we've already touched on a couple of things that are possibilities, like some of the shards of the Mad God kind of being made manifest. Could be monsters in and of themselves. But is there any other kind of, I don't want to use the word theme because I know like what we're going for is kind of this chaos, but is there anything that stamps something aside from just magic as being a creature from Sunderhearth?
As I was trying not to think about it, I did kind of like the image of fighting these kind of mutated creatures in my head was like this weird kind of like oil slick iridescence to things. That's in my head what magic is, I guess. And I was almost thinking like kind of as creatures get more and more mutated, I guess towards maybe the epicenter, or if they're just using magic like crazy, they would kind of turn into these almost unrecognizable weird blob creature. I don't know, maybe some kind of strange like I don't even know, something odd and like very clearly not okay anymore. Basically.
Yeah, maybe like their anatomies have combined with other things, or parts of them have become amorphous and shapeless, and they're just kind of a, like you said, a blob, or where there once was structure, it's no longer present, or it's different and bent at a weird angle or something. Could be interesting.
Got some crazy Ferngully vibes from that for a moment. That's it fits like the theme of chaos, right? And we've already kind of touched on people that have been changed at the epicenter, right? Crystallized, and the Mad God's remnants being these splintered things that are sort of like these gibbering creatures at points. And yeah, so I mean, if you just look at it and go, okay, well, the natural creatures that were there, how were they affected? And for them to sort of take on, you're talking about a point where all the planes are kind of very thinly veiled from each other. So, you all of a sudden you have a bear that's part fire elemental, but also miasmic and amorphous. Like it's a gelatinous cube fire bear. And that's completely reasonable for Sunderhearth because it makes no sense there, right?
So what you're saying is we're going back to 3rd edition, where you just keep stacking those templates on top of
I carefully avoided the word template. But yeah. But it's that amazing gift that a lot of DMs overlook of reskinning things that are in the monster manual. Because when you tell your players that there's 12 goblins, they immediately all go, okay, they have about 9 hit points apiece, and that's just how it runs down. But if you tell them that there's an amorphous fire elemental gummy bear, or Uzi, not gummy bear, totally different. Totally, I like the pineapple flavored ones.
Flaming gummy bears. Are you a bartender?
I've been known to mix a drink or two. But yeah, but once you do that and you take away that encyclopedic knowledge, like you referred to it earlier, it does lend an edge back to the game, right? And not quite knowing what you're fighting, you don't get that mental image of the picture from the monster manual. You're living in the moment. What's this DM describing to me? How does this fit into the Sunderhearth mythos, and how my understanding of this as we've been playing through it, how is this informing my image rather than some of the beautiful artwork, admittedly, that's in the monster manual. So reskinning, combining, especially stuff towards the epicenter, I think that's awesome.
And I like the idea that it kind of implies this kind of understood hazard, I guess, that even if you've been traveling to the center of the Sunderhearth, you're experienced in doing this, you still don't know what to expect. You still have no idea what you could run across, and it could still be something that is way above your pay grade, and you would still have to deal with it. And it especially for a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where the amount of damage and things that you can do from early levels on to later levels is so widespread that it keeps the same places of Sunderhearth available to all of the levels. You can, as a DM, you can fine tune it, and just that's what they run across this time. It just so happens to be something that you can barely manage to handle again. And you can keep that going without breaking the believability of the setting.
My mind is drawn to the old school, and I think they might still be in DMG, like the random encounter tables, right? Where you just, like, it's the third day of travel. I roll. Okay, you guys ran into 14 angry elves, right? And there's not really a story moment behind it, but all of a sudden, that kind of almost makes sense with that, with the being closer to the epicenter of Sunderhearth is, you really can take that die roll in that moment where you don't have something planned, and as long as the DM can explain it in terms that make sense for Sunderhearth, then that randomness is perhaps a little more appropriate than it would be in a standard, D&D. I'm by no means telling anyone to go rely on random charts. Please don't do that. Have story reasons for the most part, please.
So, I just thought about seeing your picture, your background. Flying creatures within Sunderhearth. What height is the ceiling at the epicenter? Like, are we talking a mile? Or is it the same as the radius? Is it like a true dome? If so, what the hell is it? Does it matter?
Does it continue underground?
Ooh. If it goes into the sky, I think it has to go underground.
Yeah. Like, all of a sudden, it's this orb that was created.
Yeah. I like the fact that the magic was so powerful that it ignored the geography around it, and it just passed, like, straight through it.
I love the idea of it having a ceiling. I also like the idea that, perhaps once you get above, like, the canopy of this area, that there's a color to it, right? The way that it sort of refracts sunlight or whatever. And so you get towards the top of it, and there's this sort of perpetual early morning or dusk that happens. Like, it just never goes completely dark up there because of all of the radiating magical energy. Because I like that there's a sort of attractive feature about this otherwise horrible thing that exists.
Have we ever talked about that? About the border of Sunderhearth and, like, what it looks like? Like, the actual... Huh. That seems like a conversation that we should have had before now.
Maybe in Magic. Maybe it could...
Whatever.
All right, so it's not monsters, but can we tackle that?
Sure. Why not? There's no rules here.
That's right.
In my mind, I've always pictured this slightly colored, impossibly thin layer, almost like old school fantasy art, where it looks like just basically a bubble that's about to pop, and it's just got the shine of the light kind of reflecting off of it, almost like it's pristine glass, but it's very, 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 very thin all over. But that's just the way I've been picturing it in my mind.
I had always imagined similar, but that it was distorting of images. So, like, looking from the inside out, you can clearly see what's still out there. But looking outside in, you get this blurred image, or even more silhouettes than true imagery. And that, if I had to explain why my brain saw it that way, part of the magic was to deter people from going in, so you don't see what's on the inside. But because everyone wanted to be able to see their loved ones they're now cut off from originally, you could still see, back out. I don't know if that's right or not. But I definitely think it's a bubble, above ground, underground, and definitely visible.
If it's slightly opaque, that raises a very interesting question of what happens when the sun goes behind it for the rest of the world. That's really cool.
There's just this giant shadow that falls out.
It just creeps across the entire land. This big, looks like a boob, just kind of across the entire world.
I mean, if you go, okay, this thing is 40 miles across, 50, 100 miles across, whatever it is. If it's also, so if it's 100 miles across, it would be 50 miles tall, assuming that the Earth is the midpoint of it and it goes 50 miles underground. That's a pretty large shadow to all of it. Because, I mean, like, you look at the Himalayas and they cast a pretty big shadow and they're not 50 miles tall. So last time I checked, right? Someone double checked me on that. They didn't get bigger. Thanks.
You got me. She's a scientist.
That's my geology. I don't. That's not the field.
She's like, the biology of a mountain. Rock. But
you wouldn't be wrong.
The imagery is awesome.
I don't know. Yeah, love to think about it. But let's head back into the tooth and fang and scale of it all. So yeah, do you guys have any ideas for possible defined creatures that aren't just these kind of amalgamations of chaos?
Well, I have a question. So specifically for the inside of Sunderhearth, where magic is everywhere, I think it's important to maybe distinguish how it affects things that are not magical initially. So, like, does it affect the grass and the water sources and like inanimate objects? Like, where are we drawing the line? So back to magic is basically the question.
Right, but that makes a lot of sense. So I'd always thought towards the epicenter that there was a definite effect, right? Go far fetched here, right? You have plants that became sentient but not mobile, so they're still stuck where they are, but now they are living, thinking creatures. Your grass turns vibrant pink. The water there is as viscous as blood, but as it got further out, nature has this beautiful ability to try and correct itself. And so over time, the further out you go, like when you have these pockets of population that exist in Sunderhearth, we kind of look at amorphous, hey, put your hub cities where you need them. Things are a lot more normal, but also people have just come to accept things that are abnormal, right? So watermelons are the size of ponies now. That's not a terrible thing, but it's super odd. But I think maybe that's in my brain always been the key is in the light, on the outskirts, it's odd. In the dark, near the center, it's scary. And it just transitions as you get closer.
Yeah, I think again, having the inside of Sunderhearth, but not necessarily the center, be a really good place to showcase how everything is just a little off-centered. Like, it's as you might expect it, but just a little slight jog to the left. And that's where you showcase that, is things like watermelons the size of a cart. The fact that everybody walks backwards now, or whatever. However you want to showcase that, I think that's a really good place to do that. As far as like the center of Sunderhearth goes, I've always kind of felt very much in my mind like you're heading into Chernobyl. Like it's it's the place that nobody really wants to go because it's really bad news, and everything that did survive that area is forever changed, and not in a positive way. So even going there has that feeling of, like radiation. You're going to get some on you. Like, when you come back, you're not leaving it all behind. And I definitely think that having it showcased in a way that you have monsters that once were this way, or animals that were once this way, and you showcase them now, and they're not just dire squirrels. They also fly and breathe fire and whatever else. Make them weird and terrifying.
Talking specifically about creatures that I guess would be sort of quintessential Sunderhearth, right? What's iconic to Sunderhearth? I keep having in my mind, I don't know why I'm so fixated on it, but the plants changed horribly. And one of the things I thought was you had this battle that was going on, right? People are dying left, right, and center, and then the magic goes off. So if you have this viney plant that has become parasitic and now feeds off of blood, and so you have a plant that you would look at it and go, oh, that's a weird looking bush, and then you wake up and it's not there anymore, but neither's John, right? Because it literally like wraps around and like what's the word when you exsanguinate? Got it. Just drains people completely. To me, that is odd, but also more terrifying than a bat, fox, bat, squirrel, flying, breathing fire, gelatinous gummy bear. Because one of the things that I think is interesting is always the fear of the unknown, right? People joke all the time that everything in Australia can kill you. And so I keep thinking of Sunderhearth as just Australia. Everything can kill you. But if you go there, you don't know what can, right? Like, and that adventurer going in, what plant's going to move? Like, what rock is going to stand up and pull out a sword and start like wailing on you because you didn't know it was a thing? So I really do like the idea of plants being heavily messed up and making them much larger contenders in the world rather than just set dressing.
Yeah, and I had a thought just a moment ago. I don't know if anybody has not seen the movie Annihilation. If you have, cover your ears. Don't listen, because this is going to be a spoiler. But in Annihilation, things have started evolving, morphing together, like on the molecular level. So I'm seeing some of that kind of stuff play out in my head whenever I'm thinking about the center of Sunderhearth. That there might be something that is part plant and part animal, or part animal and part person, or part person and part park bench, and there is no real explanation to what you might see or find there.
Yeah, I think I like both of those kind of ideas for all the really nasty kind of things. I think that also something that would happen in the center is, again, if everything is affected, like the grass, the water, everything, that's, especially grass, number one, plants are, the primary producers of life in basic ecology. So as you go up the trophic level, there's this phenomenon where the higher you go, the more concentrated all of those nutrients are. And so that's what happened with like raptors in the US, like bald eagles, with like lead poisoning. So there would be a bunch in waterways, and then fish would eat it. And then, a fish would be fine and not really so affected because it only eats so much of the lead-filled whatever, algae, plankton, whatever. But then an eagle has to eat like 12 fish a day to survive. So the effect is amplified. So I think that the typical apex predators that are in the epicenter of Sunderhearth would be fucking bananas. Just like
That's
full
awesome.
on acid trip, like god tier kind of beast.
Right. That's amazing. I hadn't even thought of that, and I think it's a perfect kind of way to use real world science, real world logic to build a fantasy world, which is something that I love doing whenever I'm world building, is finding a reason that it makes sense, and then twisting the hell out of it. So I think having that magical radiation, like you said, kind of condense to the point where these alpha predators are the worst examples of the way that Sunderhearth works. I think that's brilliant.
So now I'm really scared of scavengers. Because in terms of D&D fantasy worlds, when you're going down the monster checklist, right, you're like, all right, dragons, check. Orcs, check. Undead, check. So if the magic goes off, kaboom, and scavengers start eating all of these dead bodies, and they at the epicenter of this magic, and they start absorbing that, do you now have like coyotes that are running around with half of a dead man like growing out of them, and that becomes your undead, right? Like you've got these like crows and stuff or ravens that fly around and have human hands instead of feet. Like they've got like bone hands or human looking faces, like these disturbing amount, but it's always this dead version of it, almost like the dead thing it ate becomes this cancerous tumor that grows onto it, but is sickly still viable for some aspect other than giving me nightmares.
So that's the job of everything in this world. But maybe that's the way that it works. Maybe it's through consumption. It's, something eats something for sustenance, like normal, but then it takes on evolutionary qualities of that thing. You've got like a Cujo type thing that ends up happening where, it's this combining of all of these genetical markers and things, these abilities that kind of just stack up into this, like you said, a divine godlike entity by the time you get to the top of the food chain.
So we get the world's worst, scariest version of a werewolf ever, because you have feral wolves, feral dogs that are eating these dead bodies and now take on evolutionary characteristics of it. So they start walking on hind legs. They have these malformed front arms and are two-legged, cannibal, flesh-eating, undead wolves. Awesome. I don't want to go to Sunderhearth ever.
That's the point.
Yikes.
Then it raises the question, what happens when you eat a ration while you're there?
You become a
check out my abs, they've become hardtack.
That's right. I knew Dave had chocolate on him. How can you tell? Gross. That's not chocolate. Ew. Yes. But I think it's beautiful, right? Especially if it is through this consumption. So you have these deer and rabbits and stuff that are eating this messed up grass near the epicenter, and so now they're you have these grass shaggy coated deer that give off that they poof pollen that is hallucinogenic or whatever, right? Like these weird. Yipes. Sunderhearth is messed up.
I take it. I think it's cool. And again, it leaves the door wide open for people to create whatever their fucked up imagination can come up with.
Does that also mean that you have people who know this and actively seek out to consume these more powerful beasts and hoping, it's almost shamanistic, right? Like, I'm going to impart the spirit of the wolf to me, but legitimately, oh, that's awesome. So you have got people to go and do that. But remember, we talked about the more you use magic, the more characteristics of chaos you took on, like scales, fur, whatever. So you don't know those people who are heavily into magic. Are they just heavily into magic, or have they crossed the line, are now consuming these things? Because at some point, they're gonna look oddly similar. This guy who goes out and is, eating wolves because he's trying to get, wolf-like characteristics, versus the guy who just uses mending a lot on wagon wheels. It creates that weirdness.
Or
I like it.
Maybe there's not even a difference. Maybe that's how you're making the magic happen, is through the essence of these beings that you're possibly having to consume as part of your magic. Here we are. We're talking about magic again.
Right. Yeah, but then mechanically you're saying, hey, if you want to do magic, you're eating creatures. I don't know. I mean,
that's true. That's true.
So
people who are like, yeah, that's how it works. So we're going to eat all the animals and just go nuts.
And now PETA has banned our book. But also like it's like, all right, so you choose, you got your spell book, a focus, or animal parts. Just pick one of those three.
It gives the magic a very pagan kind of feel to it, an old world kind of vibe. A lot of these things being hunted or sacrificed or harvested.
And I mean, it makes sense. Well, it makes sense. We had said that magic kind of it is, and the way you tap it is just based on how you view your character, right? Like, divine magic doesn't necessarily come from a god; it comes from how you think your god would work, right? Because that connection's broken, or they're ignoring you. So sure, you've got people, especially over the years since it all went down, that are living closer to the chaos, who have seen these things happen and have embraced that lifestyle. It doesn't necessarily make them bad, but it does mean you're going into a possum woman at some point in your travels, because she's eaten a lot of corrupt possums.
She keeps dying on me. I think my first character I'm going to play in Sunderhearth is going to have that quality. Play dead.
And I right. I think that those people are more monstrous than human by civilization standards, right? Like, the people in town are a little more wary of them. So in the realm of monsters, is there anything that anyone sees as just not fitting? Like, is vampirism still a thing? Like, do vampires exist in Sunderhearth? I mean, if the grass drinks blood, why not people? But are there any typical populations that you don't see existing in Sunderhearth?
I think vampirism and stuff at least still makes sense, because you're talking about a place where it's this kind of hub to all these different planes of existence, and Ravenloft is out there. It's regular Forgotten Realms is out there, so there's plenty of fantasy settings that have that kind of stuff readily available. So I don't know if there's anything that I would necessarily just completely take off the list as being possible. I would think that maybe some setting-specific monsters, things like maybe illithids or trying to think of another, Githyanki, something that's very, very niche, would probably be incredibly rare to come across. But especially in the cases of both the Githyanki and the illithids, planar travel is not unheard of. So, but I think it, like you said earlier, it would be an instance of the illithid has shown up. The Mind Flayer is here. It's not, a cabal of them.
And I guess the flip side to that question is there anything you really see as stand out, like that there's a lot of? And something that occurred to me as I was thinking that question is there a lot of undead? Because if the gods have stepped back and aren't monkeying with stuff, then is the god of death even doing his job anymore? And if not, is there a weird period where like he's got like a backlog in Sunderhearth? He's like, look, I don't actually like doing too much here anymore. So when someone dies, they've got, I don't know, 30 days, a month, 2 months, next cycle of the moon, whatever it is, before I'm actually going to worry about getting them over. So they're going to be ghouls, zombies, whites, ghosts. So we kind of talked about, spirits hanging around last time because of the deal. So I mean, that kind of points towards, undead's a real problem. Like you bury someone, you just burn them. You just burn them to make sure. I mean, and that kind of re-embraces the whole fire elemental, warden deal we have going on. Sorry, you died, or barbecue.
Take that
I
chances.
think that also puts a big emphasis on the clerics that I think we talked about in the religion episode, right? Maybe. But that there was some talk about how the clerics that were left were able to ferry people to the next life in like a positive kind of way.
Right. They were the ones that made sure that you got there rather than sort of hanging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that makes sense, right? Like if one of these guys isn't around and you're not lucky, then when grandma dies, she's not entirely gone. Now she's gonna try and eat your brain. Good luck.
And I like the idea of maybe cremation kind of being the standard, which helps to fit the theme of the fire elementals and them being very important and central to the way that their world functions as it is in Sunderhearth. But also, they understand that a lot of this comes down to the consumption of physical matter, and they don't want to take the chance of, like you said, there being a werewolf running around out there with grandma, on his back, or whatever you have. And so I think getting rid of the physical evidence, literally burning it, and then these clerics who are there to ferry you, usher you to the other side, they come and preside over this pyre that burns, and there's a part of the ritual that kind of separates your metaphysical self from your physical self, and they take control, or not take control, but charge of that metaphysical self and escort it from that point on.
Yeah, I think an idea that you just made me think of is, again, about the clerics. It makes me feel like there would be like cleric paladin duos as like teams. So the paladin would be called in to dispatch with whatever it is, and then the cleric would perform a rite to send it on during the cremation service or something.
I like the idea of there being like a buddy cop kind of situation whenever this kind of has to happen. That gives the capability of some very, very interesting stories. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I also really like the idea that a lot of times when we talk about undead, there's nothing too scary about them. But what if you are a magic user when you die, and that means that whatever undead monster comes out of this also has access to your magic, right? So, but it's not thinking. So you've got it's not just, oh crap, there's a zombie out there. There's, oh crap, there's a zombie out there who can throw a fireball, and that's a huge problem, right? So thus, the paladin cleric role, and they're like, yep, all right, we're gonna take care of this before he burns down everything. But it also means that you have people that are trying to take advantage of that. And you also have people who go, no, I don't want a paladin coming in here and hacking, my husband, my wife, my granny to pieces. So we're not going to tell them that she's dead. Like, we know it's only going to last a couple of months and then she'll be okay. I mean, really, how many people can she infect in that time period? So it's, that's interesting. The other thing that it made me think about, does that mean the majority of people in Sunderhearth are vegetarian outside of food that's brought in from the outside? Because there's this weird chance that if you eat a cow in here, that you wake up with udders. And so everyone's like, nah, dog, I'm good. Like, actually, I got this cart-sized watermelon.
I don't know. I think maybe it's the kind of thing where maybe that only really happens at the center or near the center. The same place, the area where these arcane kernels are kind of possible.
Sure.
Also, I think that would, whether it's in the center or outward, I feel like that would put a huge emphasis on the create food and water spell, and also purify food and drink. Again, the whole cleric guild, whatever is happening with that, I feel like that if that's something that people can do, it would be super valuable.
So outside of the outer cities, right, the closer you go to the epicenter, the more common it is for you to eat something and you take on features of it, which is spooky to begin with. So now you either have to rely on these holy men that are traveling around, these cleric paladin duos, to come through and make sure that doesn't happen. Or a very important spot in this city, this town, this village becomes some sort of holy man who can purify food and drink to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it very much the Christianity thing, purifying the food before you consume it.
Right. It serves two purposes. Let's pray that it doesn't happen, and let's pray that we don't wake up with udders. Right. That's really interesting, right? Because the outside is turned away from the gods because of the lack of being able to talk to them, and it's this very fake religion is the predominant on the outside. And inside, they have turned back to this sort of holy magic, not necessarily deific, but it's good magic, right? Like, they're blessing things. There's this honored tradition of sacrifice now, like we were saying, with the animals, or elementals have become this huge thing. We talked about there's even splinter groups that have kind of gotten into the worship of the elemental that protects Sunderhearth. So do the citizens of Sunderhearth now go looking for some of these monsters in order to sacrifice them intentionally on certain festivals and things to honor this tradition? Like, is that a thing, right? Who can bring back the most jacked up example of abnormality possible?
I think there would definitely be some amount of people, maybe a religion or a sect of a religion, that would maybe feel like they were saving these creatures from like eternal damnation, like living a life of suffering and chaos, and would be kind of relieving them of that burden by killing them.
Yeah, I also kind of drawing upon some of the spells from the book, Cat's Grace and Owl's Wisdom and things like that. I think that there's probably a pretty prevalent belief of assigning certain traits to certain animals, and finding one that's an amalgamation of a few of those traits would serve a meaningful gesture if that was the animal that they would sacrifice. So something that had the feathers of an owl and the horns of a stag, that pleases both wisdom and fertility. So whatever rite that they're actually sacrificing this animal to for that purpose, somebody finding one of those animals makes it very sacred, very special to them.
Isn't there a mythological animal that is that a para something or the other?
Periton, I think is what
Yeah.
it's pronounced. Like it's a head of a stag and the wings of something. It's one of those chimera.
Yeah, as I say, that's what kind of we're talking about. Is a lot of chimeric stuff, right? So was there a native insert here, native to this area, that was affected? I.e., was Sunderhearth home to a herd tribe of centaur beforehand, and now that we have this base population that's also been affected, something that really becomes iconic to this area, that isn't just saying, hey, mash 4 things together and be creative. Like, is there something that springs to anyone's mind that, because maybe there was a green dragon that lived here, if it's a large foresty area, or whatever the case was, is in anyone's mind, is there something that was iconic to this area that is now changed and has become iconic to Sunderhearth post-apocalypse?
Yeah, I was actually just going to say something along those lines. I think the way I think I would run this campaign as a DM, I would probably be very tempted to just kind of go through the monster manual, pick out the stuff I like, and then that's what was there before Sunderhearth, the Sundering, and then I would just modify everything in terms of what happens to them afterwards, in the center, on the outskirts, outside.
Yeah, I think that's wise. I don't know about... I mean, obviously there had to be something indigenous and sentient here, because they decided to bring the god to this point and have him sacrificed during this war that was going on. So you would think that that would happen at some place between the two lines of combatants in this war. So there has to be something that was here before. Plus, again, that gives you the chance for having ruins and dungeons and things that are already established that were here from before. It's just a question of, I guess, what that was.
Right. The awesome imagery of it being this, primeval forest or primordial forest, and these ruins of some ancient population that was here before. And so king after king after king after king has always come here to talk treaties, right? To make peace or whatever. And so it's just been this iconic spot that got misused in this reason. But what was it that made it iconic to begin with, and I really love treants, like the Lord of the Rings treants, and having a population of something like that was here prior to, right? These ancient wise tree people, small in population. This is where they were, and that's why kings always come here to talk treaties and war and peace, and important marriages are done here. To then have them be this affected thing that is still here. I don't know. I really like the idea of that. I like the idea of having something that is setting iconic. Like you were saying, the Elithids, the Githyanki, the Githzerai, like Drow. Like when you think Forgotten Realms, there's certain things that you think of. When you think Dragonlance, there's certain things you think of. When you think Greyhawk, you just are thinking D&D. But there's always something. I don't know that a setting needs that, but part of me feels that it does. It needs just that thing that sets it apart. And I mean, I realize that what we're doing is what sets us apart. But is there I don't know. Is there a button that you put on it that says, all right, this is, you don't have to use it, but this is here, right? Like you can run a campaign of Forgotten Realms and never touch the Drought or Underdark. You don't have to. That's what I just wonder, are you missing something by not doing that?
Well, I think we have some of that, especially whenever you start talking about the shards of the Mad God, things like that. These monster, not all of them would be monsters. I guess some of them would be humanoids, but that's definitely something that I think would be fairly unique to Sunderhearth. But yeah, I don't know if there's another sentient race that I can. Did we find a place to put the Dragonborn as far as like a location?
All right, so there's been a lot of episodes, and it's been over 7 months, so forgive me. But so I thought we had talked about that there were certain races that had been changed on the outside when everything went kablooey, and that the Dragonborn had previously been elves. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. That I just don't. I have to go back and watch it. But I thought they were one of the races that we said had been changed, and that now they were even in a tougher spot because since the dragon god had been killed, like that whole ancestry, like lineage thing had. I don't remember.
Elves was totally your chapter, Steve.
Yeah, I know. I do a bad job at most things.
No. Yeah. I don't know. We'll fix it in post.
That's right. Good thing this isn't live.
So, man, I'm trying to think of what else.
And I think that's okay. I think if we have to beat our heads into a wall this hard, then it's not necessary. Because if it was necessary, we would all know it and we would go, that's what it needs to be. This needs to be here. But if you're straining for it, then maybe it's my fault, and now we're trying to shoehorn something in that doesn't need to be there. Or, much like everything else, we'll get 4 more episodes in, and it'll go, oh yeah, we should talk about that during Monster Ecology.
And that'll become the topic of the conversation. That's fair. So yeah, and I think a large part of what existed kind of near the center anyways, again, was it was turned into these arcane kernels and these bizarre things. But I think having the epicenter of this event be cataclysmic, where most everything near the center just was wiped out, it just died. I think that gives, if you play it right in the game, that gives the center of Sunderhearth, the actual epicenter, ground zero, a lot of gravity. Whenever, no, it didn't just get magically weird here. Like, at the very, very center, like, even magic can't bring back life, here.
Right. Like, it's that sort of David Eddings. I don't know if you've ever read David Eddings, but okay. So magic, the one thing that's forbidden in that is unmaking something, right? Magic's capable of it, but it's forbidden. And that's what happened. It just unmade everything there, right? But, on the fringes of that, something that Rachel brought up earlier was inanimate objects. And it keyed in my brain that, I mean, if the suits of armor, if the literal swords, if the very stones of these ancient ruins have been given some semblance of life, not true life, but some semblance of it. And so, on the you run into, it's semi-normal. This is weird. This is spooky weird. This is disturbing. Right before you get to that nothingness of life being unmade, you run into the things that were never alive, but now are moving, because it's like watching the bag float in the wind, right? It's not alive, but it has that movement to it. And so now you have these boulders that are that way, these suits of armor, partial suits of armor. You bed down next to a broken cart and are waking up to wooden splinters being jabbed into you because the rotting cart is attacking you.
Mimic.
It's a twist on a mimic, right? Like these things that shouldn't have life but do.
I think that's really cool in terms of going back to your wanting there to be some sort of creature that was at the center of this, that was like this, this very sacred kind of place with this magical sort of overlord creature who is there for, centuries, millennia, what have you. If that creature is, or that whatever ruin, that whatever structure was there, a mountain maybe, if that saw all of the, important treaties and king's meetings and important weddings, it has this incredible breadth of knowledge of history of Sunderhearth and just the general area, that I think it becoming sentient is pretty important.
Yeah, whenever Steve was first talking about it, I almost pictured a kind of Stonehenge type thing, like this arrangement of standing stones and whatnot. And now that you're kind of saying that, now I'm almost picturing the creature from the not the Neverending Story, the Dark Crystal television series, where it's all of these rocks that have kind of like been pulled together through magic, and it has a sentience. It's an elemental essentially, which is nice because elementals is kind of a fixture of Sunderhearth so far, so that fits really, really well.
Yeah.
It may even be the not antithesis, but the other weight on the other end of the scale to the fire elemental that forms, the Sunderhearth.
So, in I don't know what other game system it is, right? But maybe it's L5R. I think it is L5R, right? So they talk about entreating kamis, like the spirits of nature, but there is a kami of the hearth, right? The spirit of a home when that home is dwelled in. And that home that's used by generation after generation of family, that kami gets stronger because it does learn from the family and so on and so forth. So if you do have these ruins, something that was a Stonehenge, and then those stones were used to build this architecture of something, and then it's so old that that's been turned back into a stone. Like it's gone through this process. Like we're talking about, this is where the gods got together to play cards, and we're like, hey, we're gonna go ahead and create a world, and that becomes this entity, the sentience. Now there's another reason to try and get to the center of what's going on, right? Because this thing is arguably as old as time and has a wider breadth of knowledge. And so if you wanted to play the game that way, if that was a story you wanted to tell, like, the Wise Mountain, like it's literally a sentient geographical feature. It can't move.
Yeah, I like the idea of it being named like the Witness or something, something witness. It is a being, like, the never-ending story. Whenever Atreyu goes into the swamps, he's looking for this ancient being, this thing that is older, like you said, as old as time itself. Was around whenever the gods were kicking about and doing their thing on this realm, kind of thing. That always gives a really great epic feel to having an adventure that leads you deeper into this unknown, dire situation. I think it's a really good meaty hook to throw out an adventure.
I got this image in my mind, like if we're talking about this geographical feature, like whether it's a dilapidated castle, palace, a mountain, whatever it is, but it is wise because it's so old and it's seen everything. It is the witness to time, right? And so how does it how does it convey anything to you? And with the chaos that's gone on and it sort of waking up, like it can reenact stuff through these ethereal things, but it can only give you as much information as it was witness to. So when people leave its vicinity, that image just fades out. When they come back in talking from the moment of this area, you could hear it. And so you can get a replay of parts of history of, you know, whatever information dump you need to give your players. It can be there and done in this grand way that is mind-breaking to the nothingness that surrounds it, right? Because like you go from plants that want to eat you and animated everything's to nothingness because it was unmade, right? Like we talked about using a sanity thing here. Like this is the part where you step out from the woods and you go, okay, my brain does not comprehend the lack of stuff, right? It's like asking, you know, a blind person, what do you see? Do you see black? I don't know, right? And then to have this thing towards the center of it that is very visible from the edges, that point of destination amongst the nothingness. If that's not an analogy for life, right there. I think that's a really interesting thing. I think it does a lot for hooking. You know, it's a driving point that isn't the normal sea monster, kill monster, or the princess is in cabinet. Sorry, Mario, she's in another castle. There's a lot to it, and it becomes a great point of exposition in game term, but also in world history.
Yeah, it feels very much like the first 30 to 60% of like a movie where you finally you start the journey, you kind of gain some levels, and then you're struggling to get where you need to go, and then you find this like guru type person, or you get some large explanation of the greater world and your mind is blown and all the secrets of the universe are unlocked, and then you travel on to finally defeat the evil at the end. It seems very much like that, like a giant expose of like, these are the key players, these are the key objects that you need, this is your path, go forth.
Yeah, it's very much kind of the hero of a thousand faces, the hero's journey. You know, the crossing the threshold into the underworld. You know, that's definitely the coming into the center of Sunderhearth. That's the, you know, now all of the rules have been broken. You know, now nothing makes sense, and the status quo has been turned on its head. Now, if you can find your truth, then you can, like you said, come out of it the other side wiser, better, and now you're able to face down this seemingly insurmountable evil that you were pitted against in the beginning. It sets that up really, really well. I had this thought when you were talking, Steve, about how this creature communicates, and in my mind I had this image of it actually allowing these images to display as if they were bas reliefs, like across its various different surfaces, and it just simply morphs itself to kind of show these showcases of what it witnessed, and then, you know, it's able to change back as it will, and, you know, maybe there's even some kind of noise that accompanies it. I don't know, maybe stones scraping on stones, but it's perfected it so well that it can mimic the way that voices sound, or I don't know.
Everything sounds like it's echoing off of empty walls.
Ooh, even better. Absolutely.
You know, and I love the imagery of it being these reliefs on the wall and it being able to morph itself. So, you know, it's telling the story about someone, you know, walking back into the room, and so the whole pillar of this building just moves because it's got the relief of the guy on it. And then when you look back, the pillar's back where it should be, because that makes sense. Yeah, all right. That's awesome. Another thing that I think is awesome about it is because it's been there for so long. It's not callous, but it's uncaring, right? Like this is just another thing it's going to witness. So there's no emotional motivation. Like, you know, when you originally said it's like the antithesis of the fire elemental, I was like, okay, so good, bad, but it's not. It's the loving, caring, my people, protect, we'll get through this, survive, and this is just time aspect of it, right? Like,
yeah, compassion versus apathy.
Yeah, they're not in conflict. They're just at odds.
I really love that idea. I'm kind of sad though that we maybe have strayed away from your initial idea of having like a treant be this like central creature. So what if there's I kind of am like iffy about the fact that you can just like walk up to this mountain or whatever it is and just kind of get all this knowledge. I feel like there should be kind of story-wise some sort of creature either guarding it because it doesn't want you there, or kind of this like ancient being that was there originally that's now corrupted and you need to get past it or something.
So in the field of nothingness, the void that is between you and understanding, wow, this is a philosophy lesson. So what if what you go into though is like what it does, right? It you're fighting yourself. It's historical versions of yourself and your party and things that you've come in contact with in the past. So if, you know, a few adventures ago you did fight that grandma undead werewolf thing, but this is picking it up from your memories and is reusing it. So when you saw it and you were scared and you were terrified, well, you were level 5, now you're level 15. It doesn't matter. This is the same amount of scary for you because that's what it knows. That's what it is imparting. And to sort of tie back to the idea of the treants, because I do love them so much. If when everything was unmade, if these treants were calcified-ish like everything else was, so you have this field of nothing with these dead trees that look vaguely humanoid because of the way they're standing, but they're bereft of leaves, and those are the things that move and take on this wooden, hobbled, wretched shape of the things that you remember. And those are the leftovers of these ants that used to live here, of these things that sort of ties together the undead that we've been talking about. Like this is them past. Like they're just not able to fully go because their magic was blown away from them by the explosion. Like they were shed of it like their leaves. And so now they exist to what they did in life was protect this very special area. Now they still do it in eternity, but in this very puppet, corrupt sort of way.
Yeah, I think like you said, whatever you bring with you, the baggage that you carry over into this, you know, this area, this once you cross the threshold or whatever, is kind of given form, almost like the way a boggart like takes on whatever you're afraid of. This is, you know, the emotional baggage that you have, that you're carrying with you, becomes manifest and takes shape, and you have to face it. Literally, you have to confront, you know, the darkest parts of yourself in order to reach this mountain of wisdom, this witness. I really like that. Very strong allegory is a a big thing that I like to put into a lot of my games and in my worlds. So this makes me very happy.
I feel like that fits very conveniently in with the idea of the Shattered one. Was that its name? The whole like id ego dynamic, and this is like another psychological layer that needs to be stripped away before you can do anything at all about any of that.
And here I am asking, what do we do to make Sunderhearth unique? And that's kind of it, right? Like this whole thing is this psychological, like, yeah, there's scary stuff in the world, but it's how scary is it to you, right? Like how twisted is it to you, and how do you as the character respond to that? And that's where you get your mileage out of it, right? It's that creepy thing of, in the zombie movies when they have the baby crying, and you just know it's going to be a zombie baby, but that's the more appalling, scary, chest hitting moment than the zombie eating the lady, right? Because it strikes a chord with you. And I think this becomes a setting where, as a DM, hopefully you do say, hey, here's your questionnaire to your players. Like, you're gonna need that. Like that really becomes your ammo for making this hit all the right notes. Humans are monsters all along.
Yeah, I think it's that's a thing that I like to do for my campaigns anyways, but I think that it's a really nice way to kind of bake that into the setting. Like, if you're going to be crossing the threshold into the center of Sunderhearth, you as a DM need to be, like you said, armed with this information. So, you need to be upfront with your players and say, hey, I need a little bit of extra, input from all of you before we get started. So, that way there's going to be weight to be thrown around later.
So when you get that stereotypical answer of, I'm an orphan, my parents, okay, just remember you did that to yourself. So let's take a few moments if we can, and we talked about these monsters that were spawned out of parts of the Shattered One, right? And they range from these very logical, id-driven things to more ego feral beasts. What if you were to elevator pitch them to your players? How do you guys see them in your minds to help? I don't want to say crystallize because it's a little on the nose, but to help manifest them a little better in the setting.
So for me, I don't know that I want to define it as a world builder, but for me personally, the way that I see it is it's basically just go to like one of the books that I have that was recommended to me by Barker. It's positive personality traits, negative personality traits. If you literally go to narcissistic, and there's an entry for that, and there's an entire page. It's got synonyms and as well as typical behavioral patterns, things you might say or do. I think doing a little bit of research into whatever you might want to showcase, the aspect of psychology or personality disorder or whatever that you might be drawing upon as inspiration for an encounter for your party to come across, just research it, look it up, and there should be a pretty clear way to interpret that into a physical monster, usually, or an incorporeal monster, but something that people would have to overcome and actually encounter. And I think that's the way that I would handle most of the shards, personally.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Would there then be, I don't know, like 7 of them, or like a certain, like following the deadly sins or something like more than that?
mean, I think if you're going that route, if you wanted to say, hey, that's how I want to do it, it's based on the 7 deadly sins, then go for it. But if you're like, hey, I really want to delve into, like Jeremy said, narcissism or, whatever you want, like maybe you stay away from, like, that's another thing, right? Like that becomes very triggering for players. So like, hey, that's a fair warning, right? So I don't
That's
want to
session
have,
0 stuff.
right. I don't want, like, oh man, you guys are all attacked by depression monsters. And like, I look at some of the people that I know in the real world, that I play with in the real world, and go, never mind, you deal with that every day. Like, that's just shitty of me. I'm sorry. You know, but doing it on the 7 deadly sins, sure. I mean, that's edible, right? Like that's tangible. Like you can, I mean, and if you can't, just go watch that movie Shazam that they did recently, or don't, your choice. But that's what, right, that was what he was fighting, were the personified 7 deadly sins. And it's been done a million times, so you'll be able to find lots of inspiration. But even if you were not to go that far and say, like, hey, this particular one is like, these things are all just part of his anger. Like, yeah, so we're looking at wrath, but how does it represent? And so they're not wrathful, they're just murderous. Okay, that's fine. Like, if that's how, what fits in your story, then go for it. I do think, were this to become a thing where we're like, oh man, like, we got picked up, we're gonna publish a bunch of crap, it's not gonna happen. That we should, that maybe at some point you do sit down and you write some entries of the 7 deadly sins, right? And you go, hey, this is kind of these, but then you key off and say, hey, if you want to mess with, narcissism, if you want to mess with, this and this and this, go look at the story of Narcissus. Like, that's a pretty good way of, way to go about it. Because I don't, leaving a lot of stuff up to the DM and the players is amazing, because then you're not stuck. But by the same token, I don't want to hand someone a sheet of paper that says Sunderhearth at the top of it and says make it up. You got to find that balance, right? And I think the balance comes in when you say, hey, this setting is meant to play on psychology. It's meant to play on sociology and sociological differences and distress. It's meant to play, like everyone looks at post-apocalyptic and they go, oh yeah, I totally get it, fast cars and chrome, yeah, but really, like, what about the people who are separated from their families on the other side of the bubble? What about the machinations of people who realize that, hey, this apocalypse has this very powerful thing in it, and we still need to get it, right? There's so much breadth to it, to be able to just say, hey, here's the elevator pitch for everything. Now you tailor it so it fits into your wardrobe of Sunderhearth, right? Enough to make you want it, but not enough that you feel like you're pigeonholed.
Yeah, I think from like a publishing standpoint, I think maybe just giving the suggestion, like, here, you could do it off the 7 deadly sins. Here's how we would do it. And you can add these other psychoses kind of type of things, or parts of a personality to it that we've come up with, but also do what you want.
And you're feeling really froggy, just go pick up a DSM or whatever it's called. My dad can tell you for real. He just left, and that tells you every disorder known to mankind. But I mean, even the stuff we've talked about, as far as the monsters, the monster of Sunderhearth is Sunderhearth, and the way it twists everything, right? Like, but how does that play out? We talked about people going out and eating animals, and now they take on these characteristics, and okay, so now you can sort of reskin Monster X, but what about people who go out and eat people, right? Cannibalism becomes a whole different thing, right? Like, if the guy's like, no, I'm totally not a cannibal, and every time he turns around, you can see these faces just like pushing through the fabric of his shirt. You're like, okay, no, you are, obviously, and that's a problem, but we can't really afford to kill you because there's no cleric around, and then you're just the undead version of the same thing you are, and that's really scary. So now we have to light you on fire, right? Like, everything ramps up so hard because there's not a good alternative to anything, and there hasn't been in Sunderhearth since they decided, hey, we're going to cut ourselves off. Right? Like that was the ultimate moment of it's all downhill, or at least complicated from here, and no one knew how to do that. And I think that's going to be one of the most beautiful parts of exploring the game, is playing it in those moments where you're still unsure as the characters of what comes next.
Well, and I think that plays hand in hand into the notion that this was done hastily, that this was an emergency. It was literally shut the lid and lock it. We don't know what's going to happen because we've never done that before, but we really need to do that, or else it's going to be way, way, way worse. And I like the idea that the world feels that way, that it feels like this containment was done with a notion of what it might accomplish as far as its goal, but not the ramifications and the side effects and the fallout from what's going to happen because of that action. These unintended products that are now 2, 3, 4 generations later evolved, and people have learned to kind of just adapt how they could. And I really like the fact that the inside of the Sunderhearth area is very much driven by that fact.
You're playing inside of Pandora's box, and it's not hope that's left. I think that is. I think that defines Sunderhearth, right? Like that is what it is. Like it's, and the awesome thing is even though we've set up this containment and most of the crazy happens inside here, the rest of the world had to adjust so rapidly and so hard on the outside that there's this veneer of civilization, of conduct and peace. But when everything we've talked about, like they're on the brink of a war, it's like part of the government's corrupt. It's the evil split of the kings on the outside. Like everything on the inside is exactly what it seems, scary, and it will kill you. Everything on the outside is never what it seems, and it will still probably kill you. What was it, 10 o'clock? Yeah, so we've been about an hour and a half ish. Yeah. I have work early in the morning. I apologize.
I think it's a good place to go ahead and start winding things down.
So now we get to do the fun thing where we put Rachel on the spot and say, hey.
I bet she didn't even expect it.
I don't know. I heard a little birdie say that she's watched all the episodes. Yeah, so the signature moment, right? The thing that you're going to stamp into the world and into being that doesn't get taken away, but perhaps expounded upon, or definitely expounded upon. I don't think anyone has given anything that has not been expounded upon. So, because they're always such beautiful ideas, right? Like they are keystone. So, what you got for us?
I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a keystone moment, but I started thinking about this towards the beginning of the session. I really like the idea of having a kind of, maybe, I don't know if it'll be like a cabal or a guild or just like a handful of maybe NPCs, but that are naturalists, and trying to catalog all of the creatures in Sunderhearth, these new wild kind of phenomenon that are cropping up, to try and better understand them and help people figure out how to deal with them and maybe save them or something to that nature.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that makes a lot of sense, because anybody who was enamored with nature beforehand would more than likely be even more so now. The thrill of discovering not one unique species, but a cornucopia of unique species. I imagine that would be very, very exciting. Maybe even like a circle of druids, or something that kind of does that.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of and the immensity of the effect that ecology has on the world, even if, especially a fantastical world, is that it affects everything. You know, when you, down from like microcosms to entire biomes, it's, if you, you know, cause a rock slide, you can decimate an entire, you know, field of some endangered plant, and that could easily be a story hook from this guild, an adventure hook rather. I mean, the possibilities for that are pretty endless. For me, I don't know if this is just because I'm a biology nerd, but I would love at least one adventure where it's just kind of like even just an ecological survey of an area that had been damaged or something could turn deadly in like a second. And that it's kind of like a gotta catch 'em all type feel of, we need to catalog these things in this area. What are they doing? How are they affecting each other? How are they affecting other people? And that also goes hand in hand with how, especially towards the center of Sunderhearth, there are so many, not just the creatures, but environmental factors. Like lakes could just be on fire for no reason, you know, like, I mean, that happens in the real world too, but, you know, this is on kind of a grander scale. And it's just something that, you know, you can easily have a hook where someone is like, what the hell is happening over there? Can someone please go figure it out?
So you take Volo, Charles Darwin, and a druid, and you smash them together, and you get these people. I like that a lot. The lake on fire definitely made me think that, like, you don't even have to, like, we're talking about all these chimeric, like, bastardizations of monsters. Like, you don't have to go that far, right? Like, just monsters where you wouldn't expect them to be. Like, you roll up on a lake that's on fire and a whole bunch of salamanders are there, and you're like, that's not what I was expecting, right? Like, it's, I really do. I just want to know who this group is now. And they just come into town and are like, hey, there's some carnivorous mushroom bears over here. We need to know how many of them are female. And the player's like, what do I roll to sex a bear?
Also, they pay really well.
Am I proficient in this? Hey, Jake.
That's awesome. Cool. So I think that does it.
I think it does.
So side note, never ever 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 drop LSD and run or play Sunderhearth. You're gonna have a bad time.
Right. Well, but maybe if that's your thing, you do it in the planning stages.
Session 0. I'm telling you, people, cover LSD in your session 0.
Yeah.
For more bad advice,
Also, there are dogs in Sunderhearth and in Texas.
Demons.
So just like everything else, the background document is still being background. That's just because my life has been hectic. However, my wife is out of town for like 3 days, come like 14, 15, 16, something like that. So by the end of AtCon, actually, in fact, you know what? I'm gonna do it that way. I will have a primer document to the point of episode 7 available as a sneak preview for anyone who's doing virtual AtCon, available with a Google Drive link that you can download and take a peek at Sunderhearth so far. That's a big commitment. I don't have a lot of time to do that. So Karen, you're still watching. You're helping. But yeah,
cash and checks in your name.
but we'll get that done. And then the living document, Rachel, I'll get you access to, so that you can come in and chat with everybody else. Like I tried giving access to chat the other day, and it didn't work. So I need to figure out what's going on with that. Yeah, I have no idea. But what do I roll? The sexy bear pulls up a chair. I'm in. That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, Rachel, thank you for bringing science to nonsense. I really appreciate that. Because I was full of nonsense. And you full of science. I appreciate that. It's always interesting to see how, like, you know, we always talk about like real world affecting our games, and it does, right? From how you're feeling that day to like we talked about your triggers, to the types of stories that you want to tell because you grew up with them and they are feel good or personal to you. But it's interesting to see how real world careers and endeavors and lives can then feed into the creativity of something that is so fantastic that you can have flaming gummy bears, apparently. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So yes, I couldn't agree more. I think it's always really fascinating to talk to people and find out where those bridges are, what connects their real life to what they do in gaming, what they like or what they're drawn to in gaming, and bringing that experience from a different hobby or a different occupation or just a different set of knowledge, and being able to feed it into a creative endeavor that's kind of just what making art is, kind of in its essence. And I think it's really fantastic the way that you decided to have this project work, Steve, where we bring in a different person every month. So we have, you know, your voice and my voice, which at least theoretically ground all of these things in a common space. I said theoretically, gave it air quotes even, but
I said flaming gummy bears and sexy gummy bears in the same breath. So
you know, we don't kink shame around here. That's not what we do. Whatever your thing is your thing. But no, seriously, I think it's played really, really strongly into the development of the world, because we have been able to cover a wide breadth of this world and have it feel anything but stagnant, because we've had fresh input each and every episode from someone new, and yeah, I couldn't echo Steve any stronger. I think it, Rachel, you coming on and lending some legitimacy to what we were talking about tonight was the exact right touch for this episode being about monsters and ecology. So I appreciate you agreeing to come on and talk to us. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, it's my pleasure.
Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, then I guess we can go ahead and call it an evening. Sweet. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. I am very, very proud to host this project here on the Erasmus Expeditions. It makes me very happy that I'm not only able to be a part of that, but that you can come here to find all of the episodes thus far and just continuing forward. So next month we will have Session 8, which I believe is another recap episode. So we'll be able to cover 5, 6, 7. Yeah, as well as, you know, probably, I'm sure, touch on magic at the very least. The other things that have already been established, and it's going to be with a very good personal friend of mine. His name is Michael Covell. He plays in my home group. He's played in a couple of the campaigns that you can find here on the channel. Good dude. I love doing world-building conversations and stuff with him, so I'm looking forward to that one. And, yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, may your dice roll high, and your snacks always be within reach.